Cougar Sports Saturday.
It's complete. Another touchdown!
Cougar Sports Saturday. A presentation of KSL Sports. KSL Sports.
Left wing for three. He got it again!
BYU Sports Talk by Cougar fans for Cougar fans. Here are your hosts, Mitch Harper and Matt Baiamonte. On Utah's legacy home of the Cougars. KSL News Radio, 102.7 FM and 1160 AM.
100 seasons of BYU football. The countdown continues as we look at the greatest players in BYU football history here at KSL Sports, KSLSports.com, KSL5 TV, the KSL Sports Zone. And joining me on number 5 on the list, near the top, because this man accomplished a lot at BYU in his 3 seasons with the Cougars. He was the Doak Walker Award winner in 2001. His jersey resides inside LaVell Edwards Stadium as retired number 6. He is Luke Staley. Luke, happy to be in studio here with you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I didn't know you were going to say the number you said, and I think it's inflated a little bit. So it's yeah.
Do you kind of ever look back at your time at BYU and think about what you did accomplish there at BYU and how hasn't really been replicated? I mean, there's been players that have put up big numbers, but to be the best running back in college football that season in 2001.
I think, looking back, I was fortunate enough to be with the right place at the right time. We had a phenomenal team. We had a phenomenal our offense all around was spectacular. Our offensive line was you had confidence every play that something big could happen or was going to happen. And I was just fortunate enough to be associated with those guys. I think there has been some players, running backs at BYU since I was there that have been able to produce a lot of the same things that I was able to produce. So, BYU running backs used to be a quarterback factory. Now I think there's a little bit more running back stepping forward and being in the spotlight.
It's a great point. I mean, BYU running back factory in recent years, you think about Jamal Williams, Tyler Algier, even Tyson Williams, Chris Brooks, Aiden Robbins last year. And you go farther back before you, Jamal Willis and Brian McKenzie, Ronnie Jenkins. I mean, there was a really good stable the last 30 years of running backs at BYU.
Yeah, and you even throw in Curtis Brown and Harvey Younga.
How could I forget those guys?
I remember, I think it was in 1992 when I really started following BYU and they were playing Notre Dame and Jamal Willis.
Oh, yeah. Ryan Hancock was the quarterback.
Yeah, and, that was when I started to, really follow BYU.
And you were back then to Tualatin, Oregon, right? Did you grow up in Oregon your whole life?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Bountiful, but 16 of 18 years were in Tualatin, Oregon, which is just south of Portland, about 10 miles.
And in that moment in 92, I'm just thinking here, you're about 11, 10 years old, somewhere in there?
I remember listening to that game on the radio, mowing the lawn with a little AM, FM Walkman, I guess. And, was standing out, we're walking in, mowing the lawn in the rain. And it's just one of those moments of time that I can associate a game with what I was doing at that time. And, really following and getting behind the Cougars at that time.
From that moment forward, was BYU always the goal for you?
Yeah. I was pretty set growing up that I was going to be a BYU Cougar. I had opportunities to go to other schools or talk to other schools, and I really wasn't interested. My junior year in high school, I tore my ACL in my second game, so I didn't really have much that I was on film for schools to watch and look at. And so I thought, I want to go to BYU. That was my goal. And so I figured I would go to their summer camp. And in the time that I was at the summer camp, LaVell kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we want you to come here." And I was like, this is great. This is phenomenal. So I, left, went back, went to sleep. Next day, or talked to my parents a little bit. Next day, I pulled Lavelle aside and said, "Hey, I'm here. I'm done." And from that point on, I was a Cougar, and it was something that I knew I was going to accomplish growing up, and was able to make it happen.
What was that moment like having Lavelle say that to you?
Lavelle was a big reason why I came to BYU. Obviously it was later in his coaching career, so he was more of a facilitator, delegator. And he was just such a father figure. He was something that, because of what he was able to do and build this program, you sit and you watch how he interacts with people, how he interacts with his wife, as Patty was always around. And, that was something that always stood out to me and kind of set him apart. One of the, there used to be, during the week in the season, my freshman year, there was media days. Mm-hmm. And we would go up to Trolley Square and we would have media, kind of a get-together. And there was quite often I was able to go up there and be part of that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to be up there when Lavelle and McBride had their interaction. And just how quick Lavelle was mentally, and how funny he was. It was a great part of my Cougar experience.
When you bring up those media days at Trolley Square, I think, what were they called? The Big Five Huddle, I think. Where
yeah, that sounds about right.
Sometimes they'd be at like Diamond Lil's off or North Temple. That's awesome. And, Lavelle, were there other programs that recruited you? Because I remember, this is kind of strange. Like, I've always loved recruiting growing up, and I remember reading about you in a newsletter. I know for young kids thinking, what's a newsletter? It was like a paper, HBR
How
Net.
different it was.
Cougar Sports Line, and there was no huddle back then. There was no Rivals or 24/7 Sports on 3. It was just kind of, hearing through the grapevine about recruits. And I remember reading about you and these big numbers you were putting up in Tualatin, Oregon. Were there other programs that were pursuing you at besides BYU that made it maybe difficult to go to your dream school?
No, BYU. So there was other programs that were talking to me.
Who were they, if you don't mind sharing?
Wherever you could, everywhere in the West Coast.
Really? Because I remember you were putting up massive numbers in high school.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough again to be part of a good program where I had good coaches, good players around me, and so it made what I do a little bit easier. And it's kind of the unfortunate thing about football is linemen that do all the work don't get a lot of the recognition. But I was the right place, the right time again in high school. We had a good team, and we made a run in playoffs. We were able to put up big numbers, and again, just fortunate enough to be part of that.
Your first game at BYU was against Washington, and that's an all-timer. And I got to first ask, before we get into that game, those bib jerseys, what were your thoughts on those when those got rolled out? I remember the runway show. Lavelle even was in gear, and like Rob Morris was on a runway. What did you think of those bib jerseys when they rolled out?
That was 99?
Yeah, 99.
And Nike had this advertising scheme that they were going to do 2 programs, and they're kind of revamp their uniforms. And obviously Oregon was going to be one of them, and BYU. They were bad. They were all, they were bad. They were purple. So take a step back, and I'll go back to that 92 Notre Dame game.
Yeah.
The BYU uniforms of the old were simple, a lot like Penn State. They were simple, not a lot of flair on them, and they were simple and to the point. And they were 2 colors, and I loved it. I loved their old uniforms. And so, as a kid, you don't know a lot of X's and O's. You go to the team that has the coolest uniforms. Right. And to me, BYU had one of the coolest uniforms growing up. And, Yeah, when they rolled those out, you kind of sit there and you're like, oh man. But again, I to be able to put those uniforms on and represent the school and myself and my family, you could put me in pink and it wouldn't matter.
That Washington game, you had instant success as a true freshman. What do you remember about those maybe feelings of, living out your dream and playing in a showcase game, national television? I think it was a weeknight game on ESPN.
Yeah, it was Thursday night.
And Washington had Rick Neuheisel, Marquise Tuiasosopo was their quarterback, and it was a good Washington team that went on to play in a Rose Bowl. Just what do you remember from that first game?
So there was time, I remember 2 or 3 times before I ever played at LaVell Edwards Stadium or Cougar Stadium at the time, that in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep and, I was anxious. And I was always somebody that liked to visualize, go through mental visualization stuff. And so I think that night about 11 o'clock, actually it would have been the night before, so it would have been like a Tuesday. I snuck in the stadium, climbed the fence, and I remember sitting in that south end zone and just to kind of look at a third-person view and be able to look down on the field and, hey, I'm going to be down there on Tuesday, and what am I going to hopefully be able to do? And so I snuck in and kind of sat there for about an hour and just envisioned myself being on that field, running out of the tunnel. And and I think for me that kind of calmed me down because I'm a very anxious person. When it comes to sports, I get pretty stressed out before the game, but there's running out and hearing the fan, hearing the band, what you see, what you smell, being with your teammates, national televised game, and knowing that people at home are watching the game and cheering for you. There's just a lot of emotions, and then once you get on the field, it kind of you kind of tense up, you tunnel vision, you don't see things how you usually see them. But after you get hit a couple times, and that kind of you kind of start to widen your vision. But it was they were a good team. They were I hate how college football does rankings before the season because you don't really know what the team is, but Washington, I think, was in the top 10, and I don't even know if we were ranked at the time. But, we were able to – Kevin Federick, I think, had 550 yards. Myself and Fahu, Tahi were in the backfield, and Kalani and Donnie Atawaya. It was a phenomenal game. Margin Hooks had, big yards. Jonathan Pittman. But it was a eye-opening experience and something that I'll never forget as far as the whole experience of it.
That true freshman season was in 1999. I didn't realize this back then, but there was a real possibility that LaVell was going to retire after that season. Did you guys know as players that LaVell was near the end, or?
Yeah, he's that was probably his 28th year. And yeah, absolutely. You hope you hope he's doing whatever he wants to do. He's probably he's obviously at that point in his life where, he's slowing down a little bit, but I think he still loved it. And I think he still loved being part of the program. But yeah, I mean, he was old. He was, as players, you sit there and you're like, yeah, it's probably time for him to just, relax. But, we were lucky enough to have him another 2 years. And
you were part of that final season in 2000. And one of the guys that was in the backfield those first 2 years with you was Kalani Fafita Sitake.
Yeah.
Kalani, what was Kalani like in that backfield with you and just the relationship he had with you back then?
The great thing about Kalani, and I think you see this even now as coaching, he was, I think, 5 years older than I was at the time, due to mission and redshirt years and stuff. But Kalani believed in myself believed in me as a player. And, being young, I didn't necessarily, I thought I was talented to an extent. But then, obviously doubt will creep in. But Kalani's the guy that will sit there, pull you aside and say, hey, you're the best running back I've ever seen. And I know he's lying, but, he believes it, and it inspires you to live up to that expectation. And yeah, I mean, he would put his life or his body on the line in order to help you succeed.
You bring up body on the line. It's well documented. You navigated a lot of injuries during your BYU career. How challenging was that, maybe mentally, to face those those lists of injuries during your time?
It wasn't necessarily so mental, or didn't affect me mentally. I was, obviously you have an injury and you get down, but the thing I always try to do is somehow spin it into being a positive. Whether that be coming back stronger or finding that love for the game again. And so there was just, I had a lot of injuries. I had a lot of issues, but, I would try to do whatever I could to make it a positive somehow.
Just to kind of follow up on that too, nowadays in college sports, there's so much talk about NIL and the resources that are committed to athletes. It's a lot better than what it was. I mean, and it's a good thing. That's what it needs to be, because the commitment that has to take place to be a high level athlete. What was it like then to navigate an injury? Did you get the chance to get full treatment throughout an off season? I always just wondered that back then.
Yeah, I mean, the resources were there. You were, I think myself, looking back, I was a little bit naive as far as not questioning where we were going or what the ultimate goal was as far as recovery. I trusted in the people around me, and most of the time, I think they had the best interest in mind.
BYU, that 2001 team, you noted that was a pretty special group, but it brought a head coaching change. Lavelle retired, and everyone knew that, as you noted, that he was near the end, and he went off into retirement. The stadium was now named after him, Lavelle Edwards Stadium, but then Gary Crowin steps in, and there was, I remember that coaching search, there were rumblings maybe of Andy Reid, there were back channel interviews, but ultimately Gary Crowin became the guy, and he came in from the Chicago Bears. When you saw he was an offensive guy, his background, what were your thoughts when you saw Crowin was the head coach when you were playing there at BYU?
That was probably one of the more trying times of my BYU career. Lavelle retired, which, great for him to be able to go out and kind of reap what he was able to do and look back and see the stadium named after him. And during that time, there was talk of, Crowton coming in, him and Val Hell's relationship. I pushed, as a player, I made it, I let Val know that, hey, I was for Lance Reynolds.
He was your position coach at the time, right?
He recruited me, and we had, as players, we had immense amount of respect for Lance, and we all loved him. And so I was hoping that was the route that it was going to be, that BYU was going to go. And the reason was, Gary was a guy that at Louisiana Tech had put up huge numbers throwing the ball. Chicago, I think he was there a year, but put up good numbers throwing the ball. And he was a quarterback, or a throwing first kind of mentality quarterback. And that's probably the closest, and, I'll say this, and it doesn't reflect the true nature, but I was contemplating transferring. And as I say that, it wasn't never to that point where I was really researching or going down. But, I did think about transferring. And Gary was announced head coach. We had a meeting at the stadium as players to introduce Croton, and I really didn't know what to expect. Yeah. So I was, as a player, a little bit worried because I wasn't sure my talents were going to be utilized in the way that I thought they could be utilized. But quickly became apparent that Croton was able to decipher players' talents, decipher where their abilities could be best utilized, and he was able to put players in the right situation to succeed.
When you bring up the thought of a transfer, I think now people hear that and they go, well, that's just commonplace in college sports. Everyone transfers. Back then, it wasn't as common. It was almost like, you don't know where you're going. It was almost like you had to back channel to figure out your next spot in a way to transfer. Do you think if there would have been a transfer portal, maybe back then you probably would have maybe dipped your toes into that? Or is that?
I don't know. I don't like change. I'm not a big person that likes a chaotic household or a chaotic environment. But yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was back channel conversations. It was behind the scene, and there was a cost of doing it. There was a cost of sitting out a year or losing a year of eligibility. And so, it was unfortunate at the time that, coaches could quote unquote transfer and go coach the next year, but players were held to a different standard. And it's good to see that the NCAA is changing that approach. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely a lot more of a in-depth process. How
did Croton kind of settle your kind of uncertainty about the situation? And did he make a effort to say, hey, like, this is how we're going to use you? And did you feel good about that? Yeah, absolutely. So I think of the 2 years or 3 years that I was there, but 2 spring balls, I didn't participate my freshman year because of a shoulder and ACL surgery. And my sophomore year, I was recovering from a couple arthroscopic procedures, but I was able to participate in spring ball. And, he made it known that, hey, I don't care what you've done in the past. I got a system. I'm going to develop a system, and we are going to utilize what we have to go out and win games. And from the first game, the Tulane game, we were an offense that was tough to stop. You bring up that Tulane game. You guys put up 70 points, 49 in the first half, and that was a bigger total than anything that was in the previous year in 2000. If just kind of a spoiler, I did put Brandon Doman in the top 100 players all time. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to get your thoughts on Doman, who was your quarterback of that offense. The last few games in 2000 where it was like, okay, this is going to be special. He was like third string, wide receiver even, and then he becomes a QB. Brandon Doman, I don't think people realize he has the most comeback victories among BYU quarterbacks in history. That's pretty crazy. Most comeback wins in BYU quarterback history. So what are your thoughts on Doman? So going back to that 2000 year, we were a team that was, we didn't really have an identity. We were struggling in every aspect, and we barely were able to squeak out, I think, a 6-6 season. Didn't end up going to a bowl game, but we were able to preserve Lavelle's streak of not having a losing season. And most of that team was coming back that next year. And like you mentioned, we started out that season, I think, with Brett Ingeman, transitioned to Charlie Peterson, and then the last 2 games to Doman. And those were 2 big games. New Mexico, our last home game, when they named the stadium after Lavelle. And then the next week up at Utah, and Brandon was able to sneak in the end zone. We had a great last drive to come back. But one thing that he is a feisty. People don't necessarily, you don't think of a quarterback being feisty, but that 2000 year, as we were during that week, as we were going up to Utah preparing, it's still crazy to me, but Brandon and Jason Sukanik, who was the center at the time, got in a fist fight before the game or during practice. And so, Brandon was not going to take,
you-know-what from anybody. And so he was just a player that, he wasn't necessarily the best. He wasn't the fastest by any means, but he had the mentality, which is more than half the battle, that he was the best player out there. He had the Doman mentality, and he was, he was feisty, and he was going to do whatever it took to win.
The best player in the best running back in college football that season was you, and your stats: 1,596 rushing yards that year, 24 touchdowns, an amazing season that earned you the Doak Walker Award. I mean, and that was only in 11 games too. Even though you guys played 14 games that season, what just worked for you with that offense and you and Doman in that backfield?
Yeah, college football obviously in the last 20 years has transitioned, and it's pretty crazy how much it has adapted and been able to pick apart defenses. In the 90s, and in the 90s, football was a hard nose. 4 yards a carry as a running back was you would win a game, and you'd throw for 250 yards. I think Gary was on the forefront of opening up offenses, finding your advantages to the defense's weaknesses, and he was going to exploit them. And he had the team to be able to do that. He had the players in place, and he was creative enough to come up with schemes that it just opened up the field. Talk about my freshman year and how narrow, my vision was as a junior. It was wide open. I was comfortable. I knew that the player next to me was going to sacrifice as much as I was sacrificing for him, and it was just we were able to do anything in any situation. I remember, I wasn't playing in the game, but it was 4th and 20, and Gary told Brandon, "Hey, if you have this offense or if you have this defense showing, I want you to audible into an option play, no matter what." You talk about comeback wins, and this is, I'm pretty sure, one of the last drives of that New Mexico game. Brandon audible to an option play and was able to pick up a first down. But there was just, Gary was smart enough and was able to connect with players at that time to, put us in situations to win the game.
You bring up that New Mexico game. I have an instant thought. You noted you didn't play in that one.
Yeah.
What happened there again? Remind me. It was like I remember hearing, I remember as listening on the radio in the pregame, and Greg Wrubell goes, "Luke Staley's not playing," and there was some EJ Cafaro or something.
It wasn't, no. It was nobody's fault but my own. I was, it was just one of those dumb mistakes that I made. Nobody else made it. It was me.
Okay. It was like a transcript
Yeah,
thing,
so I switched classes, and we had access at the time. I don't know if this players still have access, or if it's locked down, you got to go through a channel. But, you had access to go in there and switch classes. And I was like, I want to really focus on football, which kids out there, don't be like this. I was pretty sure I was going to go to the NFL after that year, just because of my injuries, and I wasn't sure how much longer my body was going to be able to hold out. And so I was just, hey, I want to focus on football. Very, very short-sighted as a human. And I there was some dumb mistakes, but yeah, it was, I switched classes and I shouldn't have done it. And then it didn't, the course didn't transfer over. So it was no EJ, it was no Jim Hamblin, it was all Luke.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just because that's I always wondered with that New Mexico game, because that was a hard fought game.
Yeah, it was, absolutely.
And that season was such a ride. I mean, BYU. That's the last time BYU started a year 12-0 in 2001. How fun was just that ride with that group and to be in the hunt for a BCS Bowl, even though we know how that all played out, but just that ride of that season.
I'll tell you, man, that was one of the more fun years. That's the funnest year I've ever had in football. There was things as a team that we were able to do because I think the coaches knew that as players we were going to go out there and win the games. And so, there's times where during walkthroughs, Gary drives his Audi out onto the practice field and, Blair's Devil Goes Down to Georgia during our walkthrough. I mean, there was just, we were loose. We were, we trusted in one another. We had the ability to go out and do it. And man, there's nothing better than hearing 65,000 fans cheer, go out and put up 72 points during that year. We were a pretty unstoppable force.
And one of those games that had even more than 65,000 fans roaring was that Utah game.
Yeah.
You down the sideline. I mean, it's iconic. It's one of those great plays in BYU football history. Maybe can you take us through the calls of those touchdown runs and what those moments were like?
So I don't think there's there's no plays where it was just me doing all the work. That we were down by I think 12 points. I think that's right.
21-10.
Okay, so yeah, and we had to score. There's 4 minutes left. But the odd thing is, I remember being on the sideline, and there was no panic. There was no. I knew somehow that we were going to win. I don't know. I never really had that feeling before, but I just knew we weren't going to lose. And we started to get some momentum. We scored on a pass from Brandon. That was kind of, if you ever watch that play, it's kind of a BS block that I made or didn't make at Pass Pro. But Brandon was able to create time, and I was able to just slip out and lose the defender that was responsible for me. And Brandon made a great throw and walk in the end zone. And the line obviously gave Brandon time to make something happen. Our defense came and made a big stop, was able to give us the ball back. And I think we got the ball like on the 15 or 20 yard line of our own, going out into the, trying to get to the north end zone. There was a couple pass plays that, Brandon made that we were able to get down, I think, to the 40-yard line. And we ran an option play into the end zone, or into our own sideline. Brandon ate up the defender, made the pitch at the right time. And, if you go back and you watch that touchdown, you'll notice Soren Holiday making a huge block on the, on the DB, the cornerback. The safety, somehow bit up and got lost in traffic. But Soren Holiday makes a huge block and creates space, was able to, basically go untouched into the end zone.
Was that kind of, you've noted, consistently that, there was so many players, 11 players had to bring, have your
absolutely.
success. Was that something you always wanted to make a point of? Because you were like bigger than life at that season, and just did you always make a concerted effort to try to say like this is everyone involved?
Yeah,
here?
I mean, running back is it's a dumb position, and success of a running back is a culmination of the whole team. There's no, you look at what probably Barry Sanders is maybe the best example of somebody, creating stuff on his own. That was never my style. That was never my, I wish I was like him. I idolized him growing up, wanted to be like him, but I wasn't him. And I was a player that needed holes, needed space to be able to run. And our offense, there was no weakness. A lot of the times in football now, you see receivers that take plays off on running plays. That wasn't our receivers. We had receivers that would go and stick their nose in and fight like hell to make something happen.
You guys were 11-0 after that Utah win, the penultimate regular season game, Mississippi State. Now, people might forget it. That was originally going to be
9/11.
9/11, and then it got postponed to that December. So that it's set up for just an unusual spot to go to SEC country in December. Jackie Sherrill's the head coach at Mississippi State. Big stage. The cowbells are probably still ringing in your ears at this point. And that ended up being your last game at BYU. Just your memories of that and that final play and just everything that went into that game at Starkville.
Yeah, that was, we traveled down there like on a Thursday night. And I don't think we ever had a harder landing on the team plane than that landing. I mean, I thought for sure we were going down as the gear was going to fall out. But yeah, it was an odd situation. We were down there in December, and it was still warm. It wasn't there was no frigid air, but it was a game that was. I think Mississippi State was, they had a losing record at the time.
And when it was originally scheduled, it was a top 25 team.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the preseason rankings, how ridiculous it can be. And it was kind of a revenge game, too, for you guys, because in Provo the year prior, they had won.
Yeah. And I didn't play in that game in Provo because I had a knee surgery the week before. But, SEC teams at the time were top notch. They were the cream of the crop. And if they were able to beat us at that time, I think we were ranked, 6, like you said, 11-0 going down to that game. That would, put a great cap onto their season on a losing record to be able to beat a top 10 team. So they were coming out and they were going to win that game. Cowbells going, fans, they're fans. They're known to ring cowbells. And so, it was one of those games that, again, we had to come back. And it was a hard-fought game. And I think, in the fourth quarter, I ended up breaking my leg. And so that was the last time I ran the ball for the Cougars.
What was kind of running through your mind after that game when that diagnosis?
I was scared. Kind of like I said before, had my mind made up that I was basically pretty sure I was going to be leaving to the NFL. And during that whole season, I was getting my ankle injected. And so I knew that there was an issue there, a stress fracture. And I knew that, hopefully I was able to get through the season and recover and kind of have that heal up. But, it was just, I think, again, it was an option play. And I had, a guy roll up on me, kind of a horse collar tackle, and I knew right away that it was broken. He felt it break. It wasn't painful, but it was a scary time for me. We left there, and at the time, the talk was I was going to be out 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. So I was going to be out 3 weeks. Broke my fibula, but. Because of, I don't know, the doctor told me I'd be able to play in 3 weeks. And so he said, hey, come in on Monday, we'll do a stress test on it. And as long as the ligaments hold, then you'll be able to play the bowl game. So I'm all for it. Let's go. But I ended up going and getting a X-ray and ended up showing that I had torn ligaments in my ankle. So, I remember I got that at Timpanogos Hospital. I remember being on I-15 and just breaking down. I was lost. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was scared. I was scared for a lot of reasons. But, I ended up having surgery, getting a plate and 6 screws, and was able to come back from that.
What helped you overcome that fear in that moment?
I think just who you surround yourself with, and knowing that football wasn't the end all be all. I started to come up with other solutions, other plans.
Do you still look back at your time at BYU and in high regard. Like, how do you look back on it and reflect on your BYU time, years removed now from it?
Yeah, it's I'm still fond of my time at BYU. I'm still fond of, it's not so much the school and the classes, it's the teammates, it's the relationships, it's the, you're in a time in your life where you learn a lot. 18, 19, 20, 21. At BYU, I guess sometimes you have 26, but it's time you become a man. And my time at BYU, I was surrounded by a bunch of great people. I was surrounded by family. I was surrounded by friends, and obviously that's a time that you build your foundations as an adult.
What was your reaction in 2017 when BYU contacted you and notified you that you were going to have your jersey retired?
So I was actually in Omaha, and I was at the College World Series with my son, and I got a call. I think it was a Saturday evening, and I normally don't answer my phone. I hate talking on the phone. And I looked at the caller ID and I was like, this is a BYU number. And so I'm like, I don't know who would be calling me from there. So I answered
422.
Yeah. So I answered it, and it was Tom. And he said, hey, he gave me the news, and I was, the hell are you guys thinking? I still don't. I still think I was kind of just thrown in there because of being number 6 and Robbie and Giff. Holding that number and being able to, do what they did to have their numbers retired.
You got to give yourself credit. You deserve to be out there. You won the Doak Walker.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
What was that weekend like, though, with that coming back and being honored that way?
The retirement ceremony? Yeah. It was, actually it was on my birthday, September 16th. And so, it's one of those things that I wish I was able, or I wish all of the, offense that year was able to be there. Because, you look up there and there's one name, but there's so much more to that than just one person. There's so much more to the Doak Walker than just myself. Most of it is, having great teammates, being able to have players around me that were better than me, that were able to propel me to get the most out of myself.
Luke, it's been a pleasure being here in studio with you, and just curious, like, how's life now for you? If what you're willing to share, I believe I've seen you have a son that's been playing football too. Like, what's the family dynamic like these days?
Yeah, so I am old. I'm fat. I am, happy as can be. I have awesome. A great wife who is my number one cheerleader. And 2 kids that I couldn't be prouder of. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And your one son is playing sports, right?
I have 2 boys. One graduated from Corner Canyon a year ago, or 2 years ago, and I have one graduating this year from Corner Canyon, and they're both will be both up at Utah. And my son will graduate from University of Utah next winter.
What when they said they wanted to play sports and football? What was your thoughts on that?
So they actually didn't play football until Tate, who was my older one, didn't play football until his senior year in high school. So he played a little bit in Little League, and then focused on baseball and basketball, and then decided, hey, he always had this, want to go out there and desire to go out and try playing football. And I always wanted to make sure that he was doing it for himself, not to live up to any expectations or, do something he didn't want to do. I wanted always to make sure that it was genuine and that he was doing it because that was his desire. And football's like I said, a dumb sport. I love it. You worry as a parent, making sure that they're not in situations where injury can happen, but I think Corner Canyon has a great program. I trust their coaches, and so he went out and he played his senior year, and then played his freshman year in college at Snow. And then my younger son, Crew, played his sophomore year through his senior year, and was starting safety for the Corner Canyon this year, and was able to win the championship.
It's pretty awesome. And last thing for you, Luke, again, appreciate all your time. It's been so fun to kind of reminisce and catch up with you. What do you hope maybe as the years continue to go by, and just your lasting legacy in that team in 2001 and your career at BYU, when BYU fans look back on your time at BYU?
I just hope they understand that there's so many hands, so many people that are part of that season, part of that success that I had and that we had as a team. I hope that they, those players that were with me that contributed to the success know how much I appreciate what they did and what they sacrificed, and know that they, are part of that success.
He's former BYU running back and BYU great Luke Staley. Appreciate again all the time. Luke, is there anywhere that people that can support you and anything that you're doing and going on?
No, unless they have some money for me. No, I'm good. I'm happy, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the time, and wish you and your family nothing but the best. And again, check out all of our BYU football top 100 list on KSLSports.com, KSL 5 TV, and the KSL Sports Zone.